Hello, this is a revision video for Follower by Seamus Heaney for GCSE AQA poetry. As ever with any of these videos, it's not intended to be an exhaustive list or an exhaustive analysis. Your own interpretations are always more convincing to an examiner, and so this is designed to supplement your notes that you might have from class and maybe to use a few simple points for revision. I'm going to read the poem and then talk very briefly about what it's all about with a few pointers for analysis. My father worked with a horse plough. His shoulders globed like a full sail strung between the shafts and the furrow. The horse strained at his clicking tongue. An expert. He would set the wing and fit the bright steel-pointed sock. The sod rolled over without breaking. At the head rig, with a single pluck of reins, the sweating team turned round and back into the land. His eye narrowed and angled at the ground, mapping the furrow exactly. I stumbled in his hobnailed wake, fell sometimes on the polished sod. Sometimes he rode me on his back, dipping and rising to his plod. I wanted to grow up and plough, to close one eye, stiffen my arm. All I ever did was follow in his broad shadow round the farm. I was a nuisance, tripping, falling, yapping always, but today it is my father who keeps stumbling behind me and will not go away. I think this is a really interesting poem, and it's essentially the speaker reflecting on their relationship with their father. They describe childhood memories of their father ploughing the fields, and in contrast to the father who's presented as a really strong, accurate, commanding character, the speaker is childish, clumsy, and feels a nuisance to the father. At the end of the poem, there's an interesting reversal of roles, as this is the father who is the one that is stumbling and the one that is struggling. Seamus Heaney is a very famous poet. He's born in Northern Ireland, and his own father was a farmer. He was a lecturer in poetry, and he taught at both Harvard and Oxford. He won the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1995, and the citation was for works of lyrical beauty and ethical depth, which exalt everyday miracles and the living past. So a very, very famous poet indeed. The title is very interesting because it implies that he's always going to be in his father's shadow if we assume that the speaker is a he. There's no reason to assume that, but it's easier to keep saying he rather than he or she. It implies that the speaker is always in the father's footsteps, is always in the shadow. It's someone who follows someone without their own individual ideas, perhaps. The first stanza starts off with my father. It's very formal. It could be a sign of respect, or it could be also a sign of pride at how professional and expert their father is at this process. Worked is suggesting past tense, which obviously comes back in the last couple of lines where you know now that the father is changed. And you've got this lovely imagery about this father's power. So his shoulders globed like a full sail strung. So there's beautiful imagery of the power behind a boat when it's directed into the wind, and also the idea of the shoulders being spherical and large by describing them as globes, and also suggesting the effort that the father's putting into this ploughing process. Could at the same time suggest that his father is his whole world. I also really like the fricative alliteration. So fricative alliteration is where you force sound through your mouth and almost create that hissing sound, a th or a th or a s sound. So sibilant fricative alliteration. And in this case, it's no accident the frequency that you can see these sounds, and they're the ones that are underlined and emboldened. And I think it mimics the speed and the sound of the plough that the father's working with. So you've got my father, you've got the on the end of with, you've got the horse plough, his shoulders full sail strung, the shafts in the furrow, the horse strained at his clicking tongue. And I think that alliteration is no accident. I think it really sets the pace of the poem, and it sets the tone, and it matches the content too. The next stanza begins very, very simply with a simple sentence, in fact, an expert. So it's pride and it's simplicity. He would set the wing and fit the bright steel pointed sock. So you've got the technical terminology about the ploughing process and how he would set up his apparatus. You've got the sod rolling over without breaking, and almost submitting to the farmer's authority. And the enjambment in between stanza 2 and stanza 3 in particular mimics that seamless, continuous, relentless nature of the ploughing. He is precise and measured, with the words narrowed and angled and mapping. And in the next 3 stanzas, you've got the contrast between the father and the child. So the child is stumbling. He fell. He's clumsy compared to that precise, strong character that Heaney introduces us to in the first 3 stanzas. I think the line, "Sometimes he rode me on his back," is very interesting, because the syntax, the word order, implies that it's the father who is still in control, even though the son is on the father's back. So if it had said, "Sometimes I rode on his back," then it would be putting the father in the position of the horse, and therefore the son in control. But actually, "Sometimes he rode me on his back" is suggesting that the father is firstly strong, but also that the father retains control of that situation. And then the dipping and the rising to the plod is rhythmic, it's unrelenting, like the ploughing process. The child clearly wants to grow up and be like the father. He wants to grow up and plough. He wants to mimic what his father's doing. And the last 2 lines in that 5th stanza suggest that he's never going to be able to live up to that. "All I ever did was follow in his broad shadow around the farm." So shadow being an interesting word, suggesting that perhaps the father could eclipse the child, or perhaps suggesting that shadows can be protective, that they can be sheltering you from the sun. In the final stanza, you've got the listing of the characteristics of nuisance, tripping, falling, yapping, and that actually distorts the rhythm. And that's one of the only examples where the rhythm is disrupted by that tripping and falling. So it mimics the action. And interestingly, the role reversal in the last few lines suggests that it's now actually the father who's in that place. With the words "behind me," the child is the one who is now ahead, and the final 5 words, "and will not go away," do suggest a sense of ambiguity, a sense of uncertainty. Will not go away. Does that suggest perhaps a strength of character from the father, that he's determined, he's not giving up? Or does it suggest actually that there's been a souring in the relationship, and the father is now the nuisance to the son, or the son would like to be rid of his father? So I find these last lines quite ambiguous, and that's what I love about poetry, is that you're able to draw your own conclusions and support them through your analysis. In terms of the form and structure of this poem, it is mostly iambic tetrameter, which means you've got that heartbeat rhythm of unstressed, stressed syllable, and it's 8 syllables per line, 4 feet. And this gives the poem a rhythmic and controlled pace and meter, which mimics the ploughing process in the poem.